Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Good afternoon. This is Story by Story.
Sharing the human experience. I'm Kate Dudding.
And I'm Joe Doolittle, and we're so pleased that you've joined us for an hour of stories and conversations about storytelling and a little bit of what's up in storytelling in the region. Mm-hmm. And we should say, Happy New Year! Because we've had quite a 2011, and if you thought that was something, get ready for storytelling in 2012. Later on in the program, we're going to talk about some of those events that are coming up. But Kate, I got to tell you, I'm just taking a deep breath because that holiday season was so wonderful. But I'm kind of glad that it's finished.
Well, I'm always glad sort of that I survive it. But there were wonderful moments of being together with family, and really that's more important than the perfect wreath on the door or any of those other
Yep, that's for sure.
stuff.
That's for sure. And our format, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, is that we do a bit of overview, and then we have a guest teller who tells a story and talks about storytelling with us. And then we'll do an update on storytelling as an art within the region and what's on schedule. We'll have a few more stories, and then we'll say goodnight. And we do have an ulterior motive with this show, and that's to interest you in learning more and listening more to live storytelling in your hometown.
Definitely. And also to appreciate the art form in general, because storytelling is important in many professions, that one always hopes that one's doctor actually listens to you. And there is a department at Columbia University in their medical school dedicated to teaching people to listen to their patients, and also gives them an opportunity to tell their stories, because the medical profession is very stressful, and they need an outlet for their stories to prevent burnout. So storytelling is a performance art, but it's a basic form of humans connecting.
Right. It's a great connector. And the idea of storytelling as one of the armaments of the healing professions is a pretty good segue into our guest teller this morning. Harlan Ratmeyer, the Reverend Harlan Ratmeyer, is our guest, and he's the chaplain at Albany Medical Center. And in addition to that more than full-time role, he is the pastor of the First Reformed Church of South Bethlehem. I want to talk a little bit about Harlan because he's a dear friend, and we've been storytelling colleagues for several years. But I want to brag on him for a bit. I've learned a great deal about the art of storytelling just by being around Harlan. And I've been pleased to be on the same stage with him. But a couple of stories from this year. The medical school does reunions for its graduating classes, and the class of 2011 was surveyed before its reunion, and the question was, who is the one person at Albany Medical Center who has influenced you the most in your career? And 45% of the students answered for the top spot, Chaplain Harlan Ratmeyer. And it was no secret that the chaplain's office is between the medical school and the hospital complex, and that Harlan, you've had a very profound impact on people. And they honored him by making him a member of the alumni of the Albany Medical College, and he's the first non-physician to be so honored. So I think that's one of the kudos for Harlan. The other thing that Harlan has had influence in is the very nature of the vocation of being a chaplain. And soon after arriving at Albany Med 15 years ago, he organized a clinical pastoral education program which trains chaplains. And he's been at that about 14 or 15 years. He's been a member of the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education for much of his career. And this past fall at their annual meeting, they gave Harlan their award of great merit, and it was rightfully deserved. And Harlan, we are so pleased that you're here with us today. Welcome to Story by Story.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. And, I've heard you tell stories, and to just say something for the audience so they can get the idea of that Midwestern Illinois voice. It's really just kind of...
Say something.
Say something.
Say
Very well.
something.
Say
Okay,
something.
I think I've said that.
Harlan, I don't know that I've ever asked this question. I just kind of presumed you were always a storyteller. When did it dawn on you that language and story were a gift that you could share with people?
Well, very early on, I was always given the large speech part in the Christmas pageant at church and at the school. Something had to be said by the students. I was often asked to do that. And some of the early things I did, I would memorize. I would memorize poems, memorize stories, and then give them back. And so there was one, what it was football. And I remember I memorized it, and I told it at church camp to the other kids. So I saw myself enjoying entertaining, and from early on.
And it certainly is. It's certainly an art that you've applied in your preaching and in your teaching. And when things happen to you, how do they go from an event into becoming a story or something you decide to make into a story?
Well, the story sort of emerges like a cloudy morning, and it slowly starts to, the fog dissipates a bit, and then you see, oh, there's a building there, and there's a tree. And so you go through an event, and sometime later, say, wow, that was pretty significant. And out of the event, with some reflection, comes comes a story. And most of the stories I do are very personal. And I've chosen a couple today that will demonstrate that.
Well, in that personal regard, you benefited from having a really wonderful laboratory to grow up in. And where was that again?
Forreston, Illinois.
Where the heck is Forreston?
Well, it's in northern Illinois, about 30 miles from the Wisconsin border and 100 miles west of Chicago. And our claim to fame was Sauerkraut Day every fall. We would have this huge kettles of sauerkraut. 30,000 people would show up, and in our class each year, the senior class would elect the sauerkraut queen.
The sauerkraut queen.
And the sauerkraut king, and we at the time thought that was really nice. Today it sounds, frankly, just a little hokey.
But just a little hokey?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. I mean, I'm used to the Dairy Queen, but they didn't have to wear it.
No, they didn't have to wear. They didn't even have to like it. But they were.
Right.
The honor was to be named the sauerkraut
Right.
queen. If you lived in Mount Morris, it was the pork queen. If you lived in Polo, it was the Dairy Queen, but we were the sauerkraut people.
So that the kids from the other place where the pork queen was, they would come over to the sauerkraut queen.
Oh, it would be quite a mixture. Yes, it was a great fellowship.
Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but were you the sauerkraut king?
No, I would never qualified for that.
Never qualified for the sauerkraut.
Never.
And I suppose you would say you didn't qualify for the sauerkraut queen either.
No, I never applied for either one of those.
But the resonant voice king, I think you could have won that title easily.
I think would have won that.
Well, it's just back to my hometown for my 55th high school class reunion. But I graduated from high school when I was 4, so that...
Yeah, right.
Okay. Right. So one of the things they were telling Ellen, my wife, was that, Harlan was always a spokesperson for the class. And I remember being in a lot of plays and things like that. So.
And that didn't surprise Ellen at all?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
She didn't look shocked.
There are so many things that you could share with this audience that that kind of add a dimension to your life as both a chaplain, a minister, a preacher, a storyteller, a professional. But what I'd really like you to do, or we'd like you to do, is we'd like to hear a story, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the story, and that would get us started on that next step in this show, Harlan.
Okay. Hang on. Okay, here we go. It was a difficult thing to live next to my grandfather, Ratmeyer, E.H. Ratmeyer. Grandpa and Grandma lived right next door to us, and my mother, until her dying day, would lament the early years of their marriage, because my grandfather was very punctual about everything, and there was only one way to do everything, the right way, and you learned from him that what the right way was, and that's the way you did it. When my parents got married, there are stories that my grandfather would take a long bamboo pole and rap on the window and say, "There's a light on in the basement," at 2 o'clock in the morning. At 6 o'clock, if he wasn't out of bed and going to work, there'd be a rap on the window. "What's wrong up there? It's 6 o'clock." Even though he wasn't supervising, my father had nothing to do with his work. So he was, let's say, a bit controlling and slightly rigid. When I was 5 years old, he invited me, just before I turned 6 that summer, he invited me to go fishing with him. So it was quite an honor, and my parents primed me, now always do what Grandpa says, be very cautious, don't make too much noise, etc., etc. So my grandmother packed a wonderful lunch for us, and we headed off to Leaf River to fish. Now, my grandfather was particular about fishing, as he was with everything else. His garden, the lines were perfectly straight. When you went fishing with my grandfather, I learned you didn't slam the car door. You pushed it carefully shut. You didn't talk. You whispered. And you didn't just walk right up to the stream. You would crawl up. And so the fish couldn't see you. You would throw your line in and be hidden back there. The only thing you were allowed, because he was a cork fisherman, he always had this bobble out there, and when the cork bobbled, you knew you had a fish, and you would pull it in. In my excitement, getting out of the car and carrying a few things, we got near the creek, and I stood up, and I just ran forward to take a look. And the soil right near the edge of the bank gave way, and I flipped head over till I landed in the creek. Splash! Now, I couldn't swim. There was a very deep hole, and I yelled, and my grandfather used the same old bamboo pole he had used to rap on my parents' windows, and he held it down. He said, "Hang on!" And a hook actually got caught in my clothes, and he kind of pulled me over to land, like landing a whale or a carp or something. I could tell he was disgusted. I could see that, and I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. And I didn't know what he would do about that. But he was kind. He said, "Just sit over here on that stone. It's sunny, and it was a warm, breezy day. You'll dry out." And then he told my dad later, he said, I just about gave up and went home, but the kid was so wet I couldn't put him in the car. So he thought he would just throw a line in. He baited his hook, he threw it in, and almost instantaneously pulled out a bass, a rare fish in those waters, a beautiful large bass. He was just amazed, and he put it in the bucket, and he threw the line in quickly again, 3 times. And he had, within 15 minutes, he had 3 beautiful bass. He'd never caught anything like that in his life. And then he started catching a few other things, a few bullheads, a carp, some other odd kinds of fish. And so we had a bucket nearly full, and when we went home, he was in a great mood. And what he said on the way back was, "Now, you don't have to mention anything about falling in the creek. I wouldn't say anything about that." I said, oh, okay. I was quite relieved, because I was thinking, how am I going to tell my parents that I muffed up the whole day? I didn't realize what a blessing Grandpa had in those fish. We got home, not a word was said. I talked about the wonderful trip. People admired the fish. We had fish that night. A couple of weeks later, I just felt obliged to tell my parents, "I fell in the creek when I was fishing with Grandpa." And they said, "No." I said, "What did he do?" "Well, he was pretty upset. But he just told me to sit on the rock," and I did, and then he got these fish right away. And so my dad went to my grandfather, and he said, he told me later, he said, "I understand that Harlan fell in the creek when he went fishing with you." He said, "Yeah, I was so upset with him. You know, kid comes over there, jumps up, down, makes all that noise, and then falls right in the creek. I knew it was going to be a terrible fish day, but he was too wet. I couldn't put him in the car and come home, so I just threw my line in, and I caught 3 of the best fish I've ever caught in my life." And my dad said, "Phew, wow, oh." My grandpa mumbled under his breath, "Yeah," he says, like to take him along more often and throw him in before I start to fish. And the rest of his life, and he lived till he was 96, the rest of his life. Every so often he'd say, remember the day we went fishing? I said, oh, I remember. But for several years after that event, until I was maybe 9 or 10, my grandfather would look at me very fondly, and I often wondered, does he really love me? Does he care about me? Or does he just see me as potentially very good fish bait? So there you have it.
Harlan Fishbait Ratmeyer.
Harlan Fishbait.
Yeah.
I'll never look at you the same way again, Harlan.
I probably shouldn't have told the story.
Oh,
then.
man. The guys at the breakfast table are going to love that one, I'll tell you. Harlan, you know, that's a great, great story and does many things. It makes us go back to a time when we either were with our grandparents or grandfather and doing something like that. And a good story is both a good story and it evokes something in the listener.
Now, I have to ask what your grandfather's ethnicity was.
Well, we lived in a town that sauerkraut was the main, it was a Germanic community, and he was Hochdeutsch, High German, they called it, and he was very stern and you know, very serious. And fortunately, he had 28 grandchildren. Fortunately, I lived right next door, and we seemed to get along very well. And he was humorous with me, but he was not very funny to most people. He was very intense.
Well, my father, I asked because my father was half German, and while he was not as stern as your grandfather, the idea of the one right way of doing things did resonate a little with me.
Yeah, you never took a hoe out and hoe it in the garden without cleaning it carefully and then oiling it. Every time you oiled it, it had to be hung up a certain way. And he had his with the hoe on top and the handle sticking down. There was another neighbor who insisted you always put the hoe on the floor and the handle sticking up. And so we were with grandfather, you did it one way. If you were with a neighbor, you did it the other way, because they were both the only way and the right way.
Wow. Now, was this your paternal grandfather or your maternal grandfather?
Paternal,
Yeah.
my father's father. Yeah.
Wow, that's fun.
E.H. Ratmeyer,
E.H.
Edward
Ratmeyer.
Henry, and I'm Harlan Edwards. So I was given a little of his name. Hopefully not all of that really stern character, but who
Well,
knows?
we've noticed that the lines in your garden are pretty straight.
Pretty straight, that's
Pretty
right.
straight.
But you do drive that cute little car, so I don't think
Yes, the Cooper, yeah.
Yes, I don't think that would your grandfather would have.
Well, interestingly, he, as I got older, he was standing around one day, and I came in with my Cushman motor scooter. I was about 13, driving this. We all drove around town. If you drove well, you could drive way before you got your license. And so I said, Grandpa, you want to ride on the Cushman? And he said, yes, much to the astonishment of my parents and of my grandmother. He got on the back and we took off, and after a while he said, is that all the faster this thing will go? And I cranked it up. And after that, every so often I'd come in and he'd walk, you got time for a ride? I'd say, oh, sure, come on. And it was just incongruous. People could not believe that he would, he did have that side that could be pulled out and teased out, but it took some work.
The inner child was very inner, but
That's right.
The inner child was very inner. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at grandparents sometimes. But when you decided to come up with a story, and I know that my memory's going. I'm at my age, and you're a little younger than I am. I suppose.
Must be
You
much
must be.
younger, yes.
But you remember things that are so vivid. So someone said that a sign of a bright mind is that you can remember early parts of your childhood, and this is not the first time I've had you tell something about your early childhood. Although none of us really know whether they're true or not. But I mean, you do go back to those references, and the way you do the detail of the river and the falling and stuff. You remember that, really, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
Oh, very clearly. I could step back into around my 5th year, a lot of specific things from then on I have in mind.
The one other thing I like about that story is it Kate, it's a good example of stories are not so much extensions of words, but they're moments in time. They're grandpa knocking on the window at 6 in the morning. They're stretching out the pole and having the hook get caught in your young coat and those kinds of things. So sometimes when you're thinking about storytelling, the points of reference, and there don't have to be too many to tie together a storyline, but they're what people remember, and they're what they go back to when you start to tell a story.
And the specific detail of the bamboo pole with the cork bobber. My father was a fisherman, but not a cork bobber.
Oh,
it was
no.
it was
Fly fishing.
Well, he did fly fishing, but with a bobber, his was plastic, red and white.
Red and white bar.
Oh, I remember
Circular
those.
one, so clearly, that little detail in my mind went, okay, so this is before, my childhood, what I remember for that fishing. And but the other thing I love about the story is that, you're bringing your grandfather back to life.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of the blessings of stories.
When I was back to Illinois for the 55th high school class reunion, we stopped at the cemetery, and just a flood of memories come back standing by your parents' grave or your grandparents. For me, not for everybody, I suspect, but for me, that just lifts up a host of present moments when they return and visit us again in that moment. Yeah.
There's some culture in Africa that says people don't really die until everyone who knew them has died, and then they go from the grouping of sort of the recent dead to our honored ancestors, but there's this interim place where they're still connected to the earth.
I remember when, and I think about a neighbor or somebody that, so in that way they still are alive and with us. Yeah.
It's a very interesting, maybe it's our time of life, but I know that I've had the same phenomenon in the Doolittle Cemetery in Northfield, Massachusetts, and lost a dear friend who was buried in the Colgate Cemetery in Hamilton, New York, Colgate. And I got there just in the nick of time for the service. That doesn't surprise you, but a classmate says, "You got to walk with me. You got to walk with me," after the service. And we walked through the cemetery, and there were faculty members that we knew, and the same kind of rush. And here you look around, and there were all these people that were together in life, are together in death, and you had conversations with them. And most of the conversations started with thank you, when you kind of see the dean's stone there. You kind of do that. And I've encouraged everybody that I've talked to from Colgate to go back and spend some quiet time in that place, because it's the heart of memories. It really is. And that story was one of the places I went back to when you were just talking about that experience. That was really wonderfully well done, and I almost wish you could join in the questions, because you may have questions out there about stories, and you could email us, I suppose. You can find our connection at storycircle@proctors.org. That's our website. And there's a fountain of material about storytelling and storytellers and what's going on there. So I encourage you to do that. And if you like this story, we'll probably have it up on the website, on the YouTube, within a couple of weeks, so you could hear it again.
And you can recommend it to your friends.
Right. And there are other storytellers there who have been other guests on this show that Kate, wizard that she is, snips or does something to them and gets
Local geek.
Prettiest geek we know, right there. Okay. At any rate, we probably ought to talk a little bit more about storytelling and what's going on, and maybe I'll segue a little bit with just a mention of a storytelling group, a trio called Three Spirits. And two of the Three Spirits are here on the show. Harlan, I, and Kent Bushman, who has also been a guest on the show, call ourselves Three Spirits in storytelling. And about 2 or 3 times a year we get together for a program. And we have one coming up on January 15th at Story Sunday at the Glenn Sanders Mansion. And apropos of the discussion about those precious moments in time, it's stories of shining moments. So we'll share some of those perspectives with the audience. There's dinner, and there's an opportunity to support the Schoharie Recovery Program. As many of us, almost all of us know, the Schoharie Valley was ravaged by the tropical storms and Hurricane Irene. And there are brave stories of people who have lost everything and are rebuilding. And the need continues. If you need to have a description of what's going on currently, please go to schoharierecovery.org. And there's an update of current issues. There's an update of current needs for volunteers. They're looking for people who know how to do carpentry, electrical work, plumbing, heating and air conditioning. Very much a need to finish off some of the work that's been started, and there's still a lot of work to do. So if you haven't gotten around to it yet, please think about going down and volunteering. When you get to Schoharie, you can find in the Schoharie Reformed Church parking lot people who will guide you to what needs to be done that day.
And so the money raised from this Story Sunday, the Stories of Shining Moments, will go not to the Three Spirits, but to the people of Schoharie.
Yeah, it's going to Schoharie, but we get dinner out of it. We get dinner out of it. And we get being together with an audience, which is pretty good. We kind of like that. And one good story about Schoharie that comes from Kent Bushman, our other spirit, who's been very active with his hammer and nail and his sheetrocking tools. But one of the interesting things that happens in Schoharie, when it's 12 o'clock, the church bell rings. And people who are working all over the village come out, walk together up to the church, and like loaves and fishes, there is a hot lunch. And there is always enough or more for the number of people to have lunch and be together and socialize. At about 1 or 1:15, people then leave and go back to their work site and work until the end of the day. But at 12 o'clock, community is reformed from the reforming people and the rebuilding to have shared table in the old Reformed Church in Schoharie. So if you want to experience community alive, I suggest you check out that website, www.schoharierecovery.org. What else has happened?
What else is happening? Well, the evening before, actually, I will be at Proctor's for one of our pre-show spoken word programs. It's a free program. I will be telling stories of the Gershwin brothers and other Broadway stories. And this is themed to the event in the main stage, the big 2,500 seat stage at Proctor's, where Bebe Neuwirth, who was a Broadway star, will be performing. You may know her from being Lilith on Frasier.
Right.
But before and after Frasier, she has had a wonderful career on Broadway. So that's why I'll be telling Broadway stories before Bebe sings. So that's on January 14th at 7 in Robb Alley, which is that big open area across from the Apostrophe Cafe, just before you get to the box office at Proctor's. Then, also at Proctor's, at the end of the month, on January 29th at 2 p.m., we'll have our next installment of Word Plays. This time, the title is Taking Liberties.
Taking liberties.
Yes.
What kind of storytellers would be telling stories about that?
Well, it's our local quartet. You may have a trio, but this is a quartet of women storytellers called 4 Stories High. That's Jane Ainsley, Carol Conley, Mary Murphy, and Barbara Palumbo. And every once in a while, they get together and tell stories.
And they take liberties.
And they take liberties. So they've been together, I think it goes back to last century.
Wow.
Yes. So that's not to be missed. And then we have, since I don't know exactly when show is going to be broadcast, just so you won't miss it, our final pre-show spoken word program at Proctor's will be on February 3rd at 7 p.m. New stories from Black history with Claire Beetlestone, a storyteller from Cooperstown, who is a member of Story Circle at Proctor's. So she's a wonderful storyteller. She's told there before, and we invite you all, even if you're not going to, she's performing before Branford Marsalis is performing. And since February is also Black History Month, it seemed to be a no-brainer that that's what our program should be. So those are the upcoming stories. I just found out, and I don't know if you know this, but there's a story slam that happens monthly in Troy.
I heard about that.
And so I hope to learn more about that and then share in subsequent months what they're doing. That's a storytelling competition of, I believe, personal stories of a short duration. That's generally what the definition is. But I'll be going to one of their story slams, and I can report back. So, and then, as Joe mentioned, we have a whole collection of stories available on the internet. You can go to storycircle@proctors.org/YouTube. And we have now 50 stories. With Harlan's, we'll have more than that, over 6 hours. In your home, if nothing's on TV, we've got some good stories for you to watch. And then finally, if you'd like to become a patron of Story Circle at Proctor's, you can go to this website and help us out. That is, with most art forums, ticket sales do not pay for all of our expenses.
And I'll just underscore that anything we do earn through those contributions goes to advance the promotion, the frontline storytelling, and some of the things we'd like to do, and those include getting storytellers into teaching experiences in residencies, in school districts, and other things that kind of inform the art of storytelling. So think kindly about that possibility of contribution.
And those would be tax deductible because you make the checks out to Proctor's.
That's right.
And then the money comes into our little account.
You know, in the course of emailing the other day, I have a friend in Colorado who sent me some update on church signs just the other day. And you know, I looked at the second sign of a church in that list of things, and you're probably looking at it right now. It says, First Reformed Church of Bethlehem, founded 1763. And the sign for the sermon topic says, keep using my name in vain, I'll make rush hour longer, God. Where were you, Preacher Ratmeyer, when that one went up?
I think that was before my time at the church.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, definitely so.
You think so?
I wouldn't claim that one for myself.
You wouldn't do
no.
that, okay.
But we do have a brand new electronic sign that can now be changed from my study. A few hits on the computer.
Oh, is that right? You could sit there in the middle of the night and change?
You could change the sign anytime. Instead of frostbitten fingers and toes, the only thing that could keep me from changing the sign now is carpal tunnel syndrome.
Oh man! So that that old rural parsonage now is electronically connected to the sign at the corner.
That's
wow,
right.
That's amazing. And that wasn't your line about.
I cannot take credit for that line.
Now, now is that your sign, though?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
But now it looks somewhat different than that.
Right, because it's electronic.
We
but
modernized it.
I thought we had a lead in for a whole other story.
Well, not every idea becomes a story.
Well, that was a pretty good line.
I was.
Well, you can't win for losing when you do signs, by the way, because somebody will like it and somebody else will say, how dare you put that sign up?
Right.
Some say this is disrespectful and others say this is right on target. So
well,
you have to know your own heart pretty well.
Now, if that sign wasn't a segue into another story, Harlan,
yes.
How do we get you started with another story?
I think, Joe, all we have to do is ask him.
Oh, really? Is it
yes,
that simple?
It's really.
I hope
He's
it's not more
very
complex
nice
than
guy.
that. I would think that's
Harlan,
enough.
do you have another story for us?
I think I could scratch one up in a hurry. And it has to do not with grandfathers, but with grandchildren. Two of my grandchildren, twins, are now in their second year of college. But when they were 5 years old, about the time, the age I was when I fell into the creek, it was Christmas Eve, and I had been down in Albany conducting a service, left here late, and drove up to Montpelier where they live. It was a beautiful night, starry night. Some snow had fallen earlier in the evening, so there was just a little white flakes on the road, stirring up dust storms behind me as I drove along. Arrived there about 2:30 in the morning, emptied the car, filled the stockings with various things, and was going to crawl in and get some sleep. Now, what I had done a couple days before, walking through the mall, I found little bags of coal. So I bought one, and I put it in my own stocking. And then I went to bed. Well, about 6 o'clock in the morning, of course, the kids were up, and Christopher and Sarah always came down and kind of shook me and said, are you awake? Are you sleeping yet? Shh, you may be sleeping. And of course, by that time, I'm wide awake. So we assembled as soon as we could get my daughter and her husband and my mother, who was also visiting up there, get everybody around. We started opening presents. And at some point, one of the twins, I believe it was Sarah, reached into my stocking and to get me something. And she said, what's that? And I took it and I said, oh, well, that's coal. That's coal in Grandpa's stocking, a little coal. And I put it down, and I looked up, and here, tears running down their faces, and they came over and they hugged me, and they said, Grandpa, you shouldn't have coal in your stock. I said, and now my mother was sitting straight across from me. I was on the floor with the kids, and she's looking at me. The children are looking this way and hugging me, but my mother's looking right at me, and she's going like this. What a nasty trick you did there. And I was swept away by the way we reacted. They were just grief-stricken. And I said, well, Grandpa did make a few mistakes this year. His desk, if you would look at it, is very messy. And I think that coal is a reminder for me to kind of straighten up and fly right and get my desk cleaned up. And because I got other nice things. And they sort of bought into that. At the same time, through the rest of the day, every so often they'd come up and they'd pat my hand a little. Grandpa, you're a good grandpa. And things like that. So through the day, I keep wondering about why the strong reaction to that, except Christmas is a time that's filled with stories of pathos out of which pleasantness and beauty happen. This always doesn't start in a castle. It starts in an empty barn or a manger with a poor child, and adversity comes, and yet we resist that. And I think the coal may stand as, even for the child that don't exactly know what it is, it's just that we don't want anything bad to happen, and we don't want anybody we know to fall down or to be bad in some way. And so I live humbly with that little sack of coal and remember that it nearly crashed a Christmas when my grandchildren were 5 years old.
Oh. Fish bait and the guy who ruined Christmas,
Fish
almost.
bait and the guy that ruined Christmas.
It's starting to be kind of a sordid attempt here at stories, isn't it?
Well,
all going south.
But they're so real and so vivid, and I don't know whether I was laughing or crying during that story, and I think that's a hallmark of a story that works. Then, if you can elicit that kind of range of emotions, for sure. Mm-hmm. Now, that's another story that goes back in time, and your mother's passed away now, so that when you tell the story, you're still having that conversation with your mom, I bet.
That's right.
I mean, it's one of those things that is that significant moment. There's the ones with the kids, and there's also that admonishment from your mom. And you were no spring chicken yourself at that time, Gramp, right? That's an interesting.
Well, I was pretty young yet. It was only 10
young.
years ago or so.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is that this is a story about the grandchildren, and I had one of the grandfather, and so in this one, I'm the grandfather inflicting whatever it is I'm inflicting on these kids, and the ongoing story has been that when my mother was alive, in fact, she came to Albany a number of times and was at Glenn Sanders' mansion when we told. And she was always worried that I was going to get the story exactly right, you know. And she accused me from time to time of embellishing stories a little bit.
Oh.
And she would often say, now, don't you use certain words, and don't you tell that story. She hated Robert Service's cremation of Sam McGee, which I love to tell. And she I just, don't you dare tell that story. It's too frightening. And so we had this ongoing mother-son combat for, I think, all the years of her life and mine together.
Well, and you know, and there are still echoes.
There are still echoes.
Still
yes.
echoes. I understand that too. And now let me ask you: do your grandchildren tell stories?
I don't know that they've done formal storytelling in any way at all. They both are quite gifted and do some excellent writing, things like that.
Do you know if they remember that story? Do they remember doing what they did, or do they remember hearing you tell the story of what they did?
That's uncertain. They look a little puzzled when they talk about it. They do remember that there was coal there, but I don't think they have the awareness of how it impacted them, or how, at least how I perceive that it impacted them.
Okay, so you haven't scarred them eternally from that.
I hope not. I
Yes.
believe deep inside, Lincoln's Steffens writer said, he told a story about the time he was waiting for a horse at Christmas, and it didn't come till late in the day, and he was just beside himself with grief, and then he was elated when he saw the pony. He says, deep in my heart, if you could look deep in the heart, you would still see a scar from that Christmas morning. So I don't think we scarred anybody in that particular story.
Good. But they do end up being the heroes.
That's right.
Of
yeah,
the
they
story.
rescued Grandpa. They said, Grandpa, you can't be that bad. I mean, you don't deserve coal.
Yeah.
They're very gracious people, you know, these children.
Of course, I had a little complete detour going, now why coal? Why is that so bad? To me, that's fuel. That's right. So I mean, you know, stones to me would have been really the thing but it does have a use.
Well, it's interesting. I don't, that would be something nice to pursue. At one point it may have been that, you know, for the very poor people, they would welcome a lump of coal in their stocking. Right. But then it got to be kind of an insult, you know. Coal, if you're bad, you're going to get coal in your stocking,
right.
And if you're good, you'll get candy or something.
Right.
So I think it evolved into, you know, bad people. You know, Santa, according to a lot of these songs, is theologically not a very graceful person. He knows, makes a list, he checks it twice, goes when you're naughty and when you're nice, and so you better
Part of
be
the
good.
Old Testament God?
Well, I don't know. It's a strong view of a very vengeful and you know, list-making deity or Santa.
Huh? There's that German influence again.
It must be rather than the joy of and gracefulness of you know, what you would like to think. Well, you made a few mistakes this year, but you're working at it good, and you deserve this, not because you're particularly good, but because I love you. I mean, that ought to be seems to me that's the crux of the matter.
Right. So that's why there's.
If you go back to the old, the Dutch version of Sinterklaas, that's the jovial trickster who delivers the gold, and the gold that gets shared because that's the root of the legend of Saint Nicholas, right?
Right.
Yeah. Of paying for the dowries of the poor maidens. So, good story. Although there's just one other little story about three spirits or two spirits. Do you remember the time you and Ken both told Sam McGee? We were out at a cross-country ski church fellowship
Right.
thing, and both Kent and Harlan wanted to tell Sam McGee. And it was a little bit tense because the lights had gone out, the power had gone out. We were by candlelight in this roaring fire.
Okay, and now these poems, just in case you don't know Robert Service, they're long poems. They're not Robert Frost.
And they're
three
grim. There are
stanzas.
strange things done in the midnight sun.
Right.
Yes.
So just long poems.
So to cut to the quick, the challenge was made between Harlan and Kent that they would tell it sequentially. That one would start the poem and stop, and the other one would pick it up where it ended, and they'd pass it back and forth. And they told the story from either side of this fireplace that was crackling. And one would stop, and the other one would just pick it up, and they went back and forth, and I was in awe, because I can't even remember my phone number. And you guys were doing this back and forth, and the whole room was just in awe, and there was the whir of the wind outside, and the eaves, and the roar of the fire.
It sounded like we were in the setting of the poem itself.
It was just priceless, as they say. But it was, and that's, so I remember that vignette about that memory and the nature of Sam McGee. Don't worry.
So it was sort of dueling banjos.
Yeah, kind of storytelling,
sense.
dueling banjos, and it went off better than I ever thought it was going to when they decided to do it. But,
Yes. And did anyone play dirty stop in the middle of a sentence, or were you just stanzas?
I think we threw it back and forth mainly on stanzas, but there were a couple times that we started to get a little foxy with it and stop in the middle and point to the other guy.
let me put it to you this way: the next time we do this, we're going to do it as a benefit for somebody, and people are going to pay to hear it. It was that much fun.
Yeah.
It was that much fun. No, it was good. It was good. We've got a couple of other things that we'd love to cover, and one of them we'll tell you what we kind of edit this tape. Kate, you have an audition coming up for a national program, and we'd like to support you in that.
Oh, thank you.
So Kate's going to be performing at the Northland Story.
Well, I will be doing a workshop at the Northland's Storytelling Conference in Wisconsin this spring, and I'm hoping to be chosen as one of the tellers at one of their concerts. So I need to make an audition tape, and so that's what we're going to do just right now.
Thank you, Kate.
Once there was a mother who knit sweaters for her daughter. She started even before her daughter was born, using, those safe colors, white and yellow and green. But once the daughter was born, the mother started knitting pink sweaters and purple sweaters too. As the daughter grew, so did the sweaters. Once the daughter learned how to speak, every time she got a new sweater, she said, "Thanks, Mommy. I like this one the best." When the daughter was 10, she asked, "Mommy, would you teach me how to knit?" "Oh, sweetie, I was hoping that you'd ask. I'd love to teach you how to knit." So the mother taught the daughter how to knit. The daughter first made sweaters for her dolls because they were small. But then she made sweaters for herself and her father and her brother, and then her boyfriends and her fiance and her husband, and then her own children. But she never made a sweater for her mother. She thought of it once, but then quickly thought, no, whenever Mom sees a sweater that she wants, she just makes it for herself. But the mother kept on making sweaters for the daughter. The last sweater the mother made for the daughter was a red sweater with a pattern of raised hearts across the shoulders. Unfortunately, 6 months after the mother gave the sweater to the daughter, the mother died. But the daughter wore that sweater many, many times. And every time she wore it, she felt her mother's love. Eventually, however, the sweater got worn out. When the daughter realized that, she thought, no, I don't want to throw this away. This is the last sweater my mother made for me. Isn't there something I can do? So she looked and she thought, and then she smiled. I know. I'll take the sleeves off and use the good yarn from the sleeves to repair the holes in the body of it, and then I'll have a vest to wear. That's just what she did. The daughter wore that vest many, many times, and every time she wore it, she felt her mother's love. Eventually, however, the vest got worn out. When the daughter realized that, she thought, I don't want to throw this away. It's from the last sweater my mother made for me. Isn't there something I can do? She looked and she thought, and then she smiled. There's still a lot of good yarn left in there. I'll take the vest apart and see how much yarn I have, and I'll make something out of that. She ended up with a good-sized ball of yarn, and she made herself a scarf out of that. And she put that pattern of raised hearts all over that scarf. The daughter wore that scarf many, many times. And every time she wore it, she felt her mother's love. Eventually, however, even the scarf got worn out. When the daughter realized that, she thought, I don't want to throw this away. It's from the last sweater my mother made for me. Isn't there something I can do? She looked and she thought, she said, there's still a little bit of good yarn left here. I'll take the scarf all apart and make something from what the yarn that's left. Well, she only had a little ball of yarn this big. I can't make anything to wear out of that, but I can make a Christmas ornament. And out of that last little bit of ball of yarn, she made this ornament and put the pattern of the raised heart right in the middle of it. And she knew that whenever she saw that, she would feel her mother's love. But it wasn't Christmas, so she put the ornament away and noticed there was one last piece of yarn left, only this long. The daughter thought, now, I know it's foolish even to think of doing something with this little bit of yarn. But she looked and she thought, and then she smiled because she was a storyteller as well as a knitter. And from that last little bit of yarn, the daughter made this story. And she knew that whenever she told it, she would feel her mother's love.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Thank
What
you.
a tender story.
Oh, man.
Wow.
And in case you didn't realize, the mother and the daughter were my mother and me.
You know, that came through.
That came
That
through.
did come through. That did
Okay.
come through. That did come through.
And the whole front part was true. The last sweater she did make for me was a red sweater with a pattern of raised hearts. But the sweater is alive and well in my drawer in Clifton Park.
Okay.
But so I call this a semi-autobiographical adaptation of a folktale.
Is your mother kind of wagging her finger at you as you tell this?
My mother, that's from another story.
that's another-
That's
okay. I just
another
wanted to know. I
story.
mean, you know, you're
No, my
stretching-
mother is beaming down
Oh, okay.
as she's knitting something in heaven.
Okay, okay. I just wanted to know because we know what that finger wagging
Yes,
thing can do.
yes,
I just-
yes. No, I think she would approve of this adaptation.
And I think it's just a great story. And to the folks at the Northland Storytelling Festival, get with it.
Because the tail end of the story is an adaptation of the traditional tailor's story,
Oh,
where
yeah.
the tailor makes a large coat, an overcoat for himself, and then it gets worn out. And his wife says, "Throw it away! It's worn out." And he goes, "No, no, no, no." And so he cuts it down to a jacket, and then a vest, and a scarf, and then just covering for a button. And then there's only all that's left is enough to make the story. So I heard Tom Weekly tell a very tender version of that, where the tailor was a mother, and her daughter said, Mother, you never make something for yourself. You need a good warm winter coat. Make a warm winter coat for yourself. And so the mother did, and then it went through the transformations. And I heard that at Story Sunday and went, dang, I like that story. I didn't like the regular Taylor story, which is kind of mechanical and snip,
Right.
snip, and you know. But the tender version, and I said,
makes every point.
I like that, and I'll make my own version, but mine will be a knitting version, not a sewing version.
What strikes me, what strikes me in that story is that the smallest thread at the end is actually, because of the story, it becomes the largest piece.
I hadn't thought of that.
Oh, what a little corollary at the end.
Yes, that I told that at a workshop, and it was Jerry.
Marshall.
No, it's Jerry Marshall and Barry from the Story Crafters.
Right.
Yes, I should know this, but it's Jerry Burns and
Burns,
Barry
okay.
Marshall. Jerry Burns. Sorry, Jerry. She suggested that I add the line, and the daughter made the story for her mother. I had already had it that the daughter had never made a sweater. And Jerry said, well, you know, the daughter actually made the story for her mother. I went,
Ooh.
yes! Boing!
There it was.
Yes,
Yeah.
so that's
Sometimes you don't even know your own work or what you're saying until you have somebody else listen
Right.
to it and process it.
right. You know, I told a recent one at Story Circle, and Carol Conley said, oh, I loved the bookends. I'm going,
Bookends.
oh, she said, you know how you started with a song and you ended it with a song? I went, oh, right, yes,
Bookends.
yes, I did
Great
that.
design, great design.
Yes.
That was great, Kate.
Okay,
I hope
thank you.
good luck. We need to have somebody from the Capital District get more national visibility, so I hope that all works.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased that you're
Since I'm going to be there, I thought I might
yeah,
as
might
well.
as well do it.
Yeah. And speaking of storytelling conferences,
Oh, wonderful one coming up on the 17th of March, 16th, 17th, and 18th of March, here in Albany, the League for the Advancement of New England Storytelling, LANES, www.lanes.org, is having its annual gathering called Sharing the Fire. And you may not be aware of this, but upstate New York is really part of New England as far as storytelling.
well, they've broadened their, and they call it the Northeast Storytelling Conference.
Right, and we are hosting the conference. There are 4 good half-day pre-conference days on Friday. There's a Friday night concert featuring some of the best New York State storytellers, and the title and the theme is Vagabond Shoes, you know, from the song New York. These vagabond shoes are longing to stray. And so that's going to be at Page Hall on the downtown University campus. The gathering is at the Sovereign Hotel on Western Avenue.
Behind the University of Albany campus, if
And-
you think of it, or east of Stuyvesant Plaza.
And the keynote is Kevin Bondi, and Kevin is a professor at Ohio State University whose major emphasis is that he was the first storytelling teacher full-time in a public high school. He's written and lectured and taught storytelling, and if you're at all interested in that transition into education, please come and
Yeah,
hear Kevin.
Kevin Cordy,
Cordy.
C-O-R-D-Y.
C-O-R-D-I. And there are 38 learning sessions throughout that weekend.
And there'll be concerts Saturday night, and we'll be telling you more as we get closer to that. But since we were talking storytelling conferences, it seemed that we should mention that.
I have one bit of benediction. This is Martin Luther King weekend, and if you want an interesting tidbit related to that, Google "We Shall Overcome." And the second or third hit will have LBJ referenced in it. And if you go to that reference, you will find the speech that LBJ gave.
Lyndon Baines Johnson,
Baines
the
Johnson.
President of the United States.
He gave to a joint House of Congress 5 weeks before he delivered the civil rights legislation. And it is one of the top 10 speeches in the 20th century, according to people who know about those things. And you'll find it surprising about what this white Southern Texan said and did about the Civil Rights Act. And I won't spoil it for you, but it's worth a read.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Harlan, so much
Welcome.
for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Wonderful having you here, and good luck in Wisconsin, and we'll see you around the breakfast table at Albany Med.
Great.
It goes all my life, life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round.